Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video number 1, Introduction to Virtualization. This is part of Fast Track CBT Video Lab, Microsoft Virtualization, Virtual PC, and Server. In this video, we have a lot of great topics to cover. First off, we're going to learn what is virtualization. We're going to learn the different uses for virtualization, such as production data centers for server consolidation, testing and development, network isolation, and disaster recovery. We'll learn the different types of virtualization and how virtualization can be accomplished because there's so many different virtualization products available. So we're going to cover each of those different products like Virtual PC, Virtual Server, the future of Microsoft Windows Server, which is Longhorn. It'll include Hypervisor, VMware Workstation, Server, ESX, and Linux Zen. We're going to talk about all these different products. We're going to compare the difference between Virtual PC and Virtual Server, and then VMware Server versus Virtual Server. And what's the future of virtualization? We'll talk about hardware-assisted virtualization, host operating system virtualization, and how Microsoft Virtual Server is supported and licensed. Then we'll learn what the Virtual Server emulated hardware appears as to the guest operating systems, and finally what's new in the latest version of Microsoft Virtual Server. So now let's move on to what is virtualization. Well, there's a quote that I read that says that virtualization is a journey, not a project. So this reminds me of security. They always say that security is a journey, not a project, meaning you're forever implementing virtualization and security for that matter. But since we're talking about virtualization, let's talk about this journey. When they say it's a journey, not a project, that means that forever you will be virtualizing new servers. It's not something you do once and then you're done with. You'll forever need to tweak these servers just like you would any regular servers, and you'll forever need to upgrade the virtualization software and the operating system inside the virtual guest servers. So you have to think of it that way. You're not going to virtualize everything once and then be done and then put it away. Forever you'll have to have an administrator such as yourself or someone else maybe in your organization who works on the virtual servers, tweaks the virtual servers, monitors their performance, just like any other Windows system administrator should be doing. Now, the term virtualization is an ambiguous term, and it requires some clarification. Specifically, we're talking about server virtualization in this video. There's many types of virtualization. You can have storage virtualization and a variety of others, but we'll be talking about server virtualization. Now, server virtualization is where you use virtual machines to separate the hardware from the virtual operating system. This allows you to run multiple operating systems on a single computer all at the same time. So this is an important concept. You're taking an operating system and running multiple copies of that operating system on a single server, and inside that single server typically you have a host operating system. So let's look at a picture. Let's see how this works. So here's a diagram that I drew, and this is how most virtualization users use virtual servers. So this is how a general virtualization product like Microsoft Virtual PC or Server or VMware Workstation or Server works. And this approach here in this diagram is called the Virtualization Management Layer approach. So let's look at the diagram. How this works is you have your different virtual machines up here. These virtual machines are running inside your virtualization software. So examples of virtualization software would be Virtual Server, VMware, Virtual PC, VMware Workstation or Server, depending on which flavor you use. Those are all types of virtualization software that reside in this layer. So that application, that virtualization software, is running on top of the host operating system. So that host operating system might be Windows XP, Windows Server 2003. Typically, that's what it is in the case of these two products. Now, in the case of VMware Server, they also support the host operating system as Linux. So you could, in theory, have Linux here as well. But since we're focusing on Microsoft Virtual Server, let's say this is Microsoft Virtual Server up here. So our host operating system is either going to be Windows XP if it's just a test machine, or Windows Server 2003 if it's a production machine. These virtual machines over here could either be Windows XP, they could be Linux, they could be Windows 2003 Server, a variety of other operating systems, and we'll be talking about what's possible and what's supported in some future slides. Then down here you have the hardware. You have your CPU, your RAM, your disk, and your network, your local area network. This hardware could just be a single PC, could be a laptop, could be a server. So if you have, say you have 3 virtual machines running here, you have to make sure that this hardware down here is adequate to support both the host operating system and the virtual machines. So it's like you're running 4 computers in this diagram all in one. You have 1, 2, 3 virtual machines and the host operating system. So that's 4 different computers running on this one piece of hardware. And that's why performance and sizing the hardware properly is so important. So once again, this is called the virtualization management layer approach. And in this case, you have the host operating system, the virtualization software, and then the virtual machines on top of that. So this host operating system is typically called the host. That's the host. And then the virtual machines up here, these are called the guest. So the guest operating systems run inside the host operating system. And so these are important terms that you need to be familiar with, host and guest. Now, many people ask immediately, well, what's the performance hit on the guest operating systems for running inside this virtualization environment? Well, there's no set number, but in general, people say 5 to 20% performance penalty will be imposed on the virtual machines or the guest operating systems. But it really varies based on the applications you're running inside those operating systems, the amount of hardware you have, and the host operating system that you're running. You know, many times the guest operating systems you run, you don't notice any sort of performance penalty at all. You know, many times they function just as any other regular server would. But of course, that varies on the application requirements that you're running inside those guest operating systems. I mean, if you're just running a single application, say Microsoft Word, well, that doesn't use much of the machine, and the minimum requirements that you configure on the guest operating system would be fine to run an application like Microsoft Word. On the other hand, if you try to run Microsoft Exchange and you have 50 email servers, you're going to see a significant performance decrease if you're running it in this virtualization management layer, because the hardware requirements and the performance penalty are going to take a hit on that Exchange server. Now, is that to say that the users at the who are the clients of that Exchange server would notice that performance penalty? Well, probably not. You know, with just 50 users, they might not even notice, as long as you have enough hardware to support that virtualization of that application. So now let's look at a different approach to virtualization. Now, users who are willing to spend more money and get greater performance in return could use this approach. This is called the dedicated virtualization approach. Now, the primary product used in this approach is VMware ESX Server. ESX Server is different from the regular VMware server that most people think about. With the dedicated virtualization approach, what you do is you get rid of the host operating system. So here is the host operating system. I put a big red X through it to show you that that's gone. You run the virtualization software right on top of your hardware. There is no host operating system to worry about. Now, because of how this works, you get much greater performance out of these virtual machines. However, the hardware that you're running this virtualization software on, VMware ESX, must be compatible. So these two must be compatible. You can't just run VMware ESX on a laptop or any old PC. You have to have a server, and that server has to be compatible with VMware ESX Server. So obviously you're going to spend more money to get that server class machine, but you're going to get greater performance. And because you're doing that, you might be able to run much higher and more powerful applications inside your virtualization software. So a third approach I want to mention is hardware-based or hardware-assisted virtualization. This is really similar to the first approach we talked about, the typical VMware server approach. However, with hardware-assisted virtualization, the processor that's inside the hardware, the CPU, is aware of virtualization. And both Intel and AMD have processors out that are aware of this, and these are called the Intel Virtualization Technology, or Intel VT, and the AMD virtualization processor, the AMD-V. These are on Xeon or Opteron processors, and these technologies open the door for more applications to be virtualized because they reduce some of the virtualization overhead. These are relatively new, and they're only supported in the latest and greatest version of Microsoft Virtual Server. But these are some of the things that are coming out new. They're on all the latest servers that are out. And if you're serious about running a number of production servers on a virtual server, that's something you want to be aware of. So it's really the same as the first approach up here we talked about, but the hardware is aware, and that's why I called it the hardware-based or hardware-assisted virtualization. All right, so we learned what is virtualization, and now let's talk about some different uses for virtualization. First off, I want to mention a fact. Research firm IDC estimates that about 750,000 virtual servers were in operation in 2004, and this is expected to rise by more than 5 million rise to more than 5 million by 2009. This is a compound annual growth rate of almost 50%. So this is a very important fact, and it's really amazing. And to me, it points out just why we need to be more familiar with virtualization and how important it's going to be in the future. So all the more reason to continue watching this train signal video and to go out on your own and set up your own virtual server and learn a lot more about virtual server with some hands-on experience. So now let's talk about the different uses for virtualization. First off, you can run a virtual server or perform virtualization in a production data center. This is typically called server consolidation. So you can consolidate servers, especially legacy applications. It's a great reason to use virtualization is to take a bunch of old servers, say they run on NT4, you want to get rid of them. Maybe they're just some little single threaded applications that don't do very much, but they require some older legacy operating system. You consolidate those on a single virtual server, save your company money and maintenance, and get rid of those old NT servers. Just an example of consolidating legacy applications. Of course, you could also consolidate large production servers on virtual servers. This makes more efficient use of the hardware, so you have fewer servers to maintain, fewer servers to have maintenance contracts on and upgrade the BIOS and all those maintenance activities that have to be performed on servers. This also enhances the IT staff productivity. So there's fewer points of administration. There's fewer cables in the rack. There's less hardware maintenance. There's fewer hardware infrastructure requirements. So maybe I need fewer UPSs because I have less power requirements. I need fewer KVM switches and monitors and keyboards. I need a smaller diesel generator, let's say, and less cooling for the data center because I was able to consolidate these servers onto fewer servers. This is also going to provide faster server deployment, meaning I could just copy potentially one of the servers I already have, reproduce it, and get it up and running very quickly to run some new application. I don't have to sit there and install Windows 2003 over again. Or say I have one Exchange server, I could copy that. I could have a second Exchange server in a matter of minutes. We can faster react to business needs. So someone says, hey, I need a new ERP server or a new database server. Well, hey, you could have that up and running much quicker because of virtualization. And then faster server replacement. Say you have 5 servers running on a virtual server, and that virtual server is starting to get slow. Maybe it's 3 years old, it's on a lease. You want to swap that server out, get a new one. Well, hey, you just copy all those virtual servers over to the new server, and you're up and running. That provides you hardware independence, application portability, they call it. So I can just quickly copy over those virtual servers, get them running on the new server in no time at all, compared to having to reinstall 5 different operating systems and 5 different applications on 5 new servers, plus the time to install those 5 new servers or swap them out. So I just had to swap out a single server. The next major application for virtualization is testing and development. With virtualization, you can take point-in-time snapshots, meaning I could take a snapshot of my desktop environment here, I can install a new application, I could test it, run it, and then I could roll back to my desktop exactly how it is now, and just, it's like rolling back in time. So these point-in-time snapshots are very powerful when it comes to testing new applications and developing new applications. I can use network isolation. So on my computer here, I could have 2 virtual machines running, and it's like they're on their own network. So I could have a domain controller, and I could have a Windows client logging onto the domain controller, all on this isolated network environment. I can download appliances, they call them. So they're really just virtual machines. I can download these off the internet. So let's say I'm considering trying out a new help desk. Well, instead of downloading the help desk software, installing it, integrating it into your database, testing it out, and then later having to remove it when you're done testing, I could just download an entire test environment of virtual machines from the internet and get them up and running in minutes as soon as I've downloaded them from the internet. So these are very powerful features, very powerful for testing, development. I've seen a lot of salespeople using virtualization because they can bring in their laptop and they can demonstrate their application in a virtual machine right on their laptop. And then once they're done entering all sorts of test data and showing you how it works, they just roll it back quickly and they're back to where they were before, and they go on to the next client. They could also give you a copy of their virtual machine so you could try it yourself in your own environment. So very powerful features. The last major topic is disaster recovery. What is a better way to perform disaster recovery than have your servers running on virtual machines? Each night, say you shut down these virtual machines, you back them up, put them on a tape, you take that tape off-site. When you have a disaster, you take it to your disaster recovery site, you insert it, you restore the tape, you just start up all these virtual machines, and everything's back up and running. There's no operating systems to reinstall on your disaster recovery servers, no applications to reinstall. All the data, let's say, was contained in those virtual images. You've just recreated your entire data center in, potentially a few minutes or a few hours compared to days of reloading applications and data. So this hardware independence is very powerful. You don't have to have the exact same server that you had at your production site at your backup site. The hardware no longer has to match from one site to the other site. This application portability that virtualization creates is very powerful in a number of different situations. So now let's move on to our next slide. Now let's talk about the different virtualization products that are available on the market today. And I'm not going to go into specific versions in this slide. We'll be talking about more specific versions in a minute. Now from Microsoft, you have Microsoft Virtual PC. This is their desktop-based virtualization software. You have Microsoft Virtual Server, which is the software we'll be focusing on in this video. Then coming soon, you have Microsoft Longhorn, which is the latest and greatest version of Microsoft Windows 2003 Server. Inside of that, we'll have an application called Hypervisor, which will basically eliminate Microsoft Virtual Server as a server application, because the virtualization, this hypervisor part, will just be built in to the operating system. So this is something that's coming out in the next year or two, depending on Microsoft release schedules. Now you can go find out more about these virtualization products from Microsoft at this web link here. Now, as far as VMware, um, the main competitor for Microsoft when it comes to virtualization, VMware, by the way, is actually owned by EMC that makes RAID arrays and a lot of storage products. VMware's main products for virtualization are called VMware Workstation. This is their desktop version, again, just like Virtual PC. They have VMware Server, which used to be VMware GSX. Now it's called Server, and it's been re-released because it's now a free product. And VMware Server is sort of their middle ground application used for servers and production environments, and it compares to Microsoft Virtual Server. It's the competitor from VMware. Then there's VMware ESX. This is their high-end product. It's unique. Microsoft really doesn't have a competitor to ESX at this point. The only thing they have coming out might be Microsoft Longhorn that would compete with VMware ESX. So VMware ESX is the product where you don't have a host operating system at all. It gives you greater performance, but it's also more expensive and requires some special hardware. You can find out more about these virtualization products at vmware.com. And then open source products that are available that are gaining some popularity are Linux Zen. Linux Zen you can read about here at this ZenSource website. Linux Zen uses Linux as the host operating system, but it has modified guest operating systems that you run inside Linux Zen. It's a very interesting product, and like I said, it's gaining some popularity, and you can read about it at that website. But keep in mind that this isn't all the virtualization products on the market. If I click on this web link here at the Wikipedia, it offers a comparison of different virtual machines that are available. And if we scroll down the list here, I was amazed, and I'm sure you'll be too, just at the number of different virtualization products available. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It looks like we're about halfway done there. I would estimate there's about 30 different virtualization products available on the market today. Here we got to one that, I finally am aware of. All these others, pretty much, I hadn't heard of before. So there's Virtual PC. Here's Virtual Server from Microsoft, which is what we'll be talking about primarily in this video. VMware ESX, VMware Server, VMware Workstation, VMware Player. Here's Zen. Here's information on that. And then there's a number of other products. So it's really amazing all the different virtualization products that are available on the market today. But like I said, we'll be focusing on Microsoft Virtual Server in this video series. We'll be touching on Virtual PC, and VMware products could be a whole nother video series in themselves because there's really a lot to learn about VMware products. Microsoft is really pushing the envelope and trying to take market share on virtualization, and that's why we'll be focusing on Microsoft's Virtual Server product in this video. So let's move on. Let's learn some more about Microsoft Virtual Server. So first off, let's compare Microsoft Virtual PC to Virtual Server. As I said before, Virtual PC is designed for desktop PC systems. It has a simple user interface, and it has some nice ease of interaction between the host and the guest operating systems. So to me, Virtual PC is ideal for someone who maybe isn't that techy, ideal for those sales guys to run on their desktop and run virtual machines. They can easily copy things back and forth from the host to the guest. It has sound and it has better video options. So it's great for someone who wants to demo, these these products maybe they have in their virtual machines and show people how that works. It doesn't have to be just for that, but it has some great features that revolve around sound, video, and easily setting up new virtual machines. It's ideal for running legacy applications like Windows 98 on Windows XP. Works great for a help desk, IT developer testing, IT administrator testing, and training. So it's not designed for running, say, 5 different virtual machines and consolidating servers all in one server. That's what Virtual Server does best. It's designed for server systems. It has a more complex user interface because it offers more complex features. It's created for the purpose of hosting enterprise applications, and it doesn't it regulates the performance and the resource utilization between these applications that are running on the virtual server better than Virtual PC does. With Virtual PC, you're more likely to run a virtual application and it hog your whole system, whereas Virtual Server won't let that happen. So Virtual Server is ideal to run virtual server test and production services, perform server consolidation, and legacy server application consolidation like NT4. It offers rapid server reconfiguration and provisioning, so you can get new servers up and running in your virtual server farm. Now, both of these offer the same file formats. That's the .vmc for the config files, the .vhd for the hard drives, and the .vsv for save state files. So what that means to you is you can take a virtual machine from virtual server and move it to virtual PC. You could use it on a virtual PC and you could move it back to virtual server because the file formats for the virtual machines are all the same. Now there are some exceptions, like on virtual PC, it doesn't support SCSI drives well. So if you had a virtual server with SCSI drives and you tried to move it to virtual PC, you would have problems and it isn't going to work. And you have to think of some of those things ahead of time. But in general, the file formats are the same. And in general, most things are going to just move back and forth fine. So the way in that you control these virtual machines is very similar. They have similar networking features between the host and the guest, and they have similar disk features like differencing disk. Now, parts of this comparison up here were taken from this virtual PC versus virtual server comparing features and uses website. It's from the Microsoft TechNet website, and it can be found at this link. I didn't make up all these things here on my own. Parts of them were taken from this TechNet website. I want to give them credit for that. And if you want to find out more information about the differences between these two, you can click on this link and you could go to this website yourself. Now let's find out what Microsoft Virtual Server offers you as the user of the virtualization software. So first off, Microsoft Virtual Server offers a number of different supported host and guest operating systems. So first off, for the host operating systems, you can use any one of these three different host operating systems. These are supported: Windows 2003, Server, Standard, Enterprise, and Data Center, Windows Small Business Server, Standard, and Premium, and Windows XP Professional. Now there's some service packs that need to be applied to these for it to work properly and be fully supported. But in general, those are the supported host operating systems. Now, when it comes to Windows XP, you should only use Windows XP as a host operating system in a non-production environment. That means for your testing or demonstration, whatever, but you don't want to do server consolidation with Windows XP as the host operating system. Now, supported guest operating systems include those just mentioned above, plus these here: Windows 2000 Server, all editions except Enterprise, and Windows NT Server 4 Enterprise Edition Service Pack 6A. So those are the supported host operating systems. And now I'll show you a little bit later in the series of slides here a number of other supported host operating systems now include Linux. Now let's talk about administration of Microsoft Virtual Server. So primarily for administration of Microsoft Virtual Server, you'll use remote management or server management right on the server console. Now, because the Microsoft Virtual Server administrative interface is a web browser, you can either run it locally on the local server or you could run it over the network. Now, Microsoft Virtual Server has this application called VMRC, Virtual Machine Remote Control. And this is a little application that can be installed on a client, and you can take control of individual remote machines or virtual machines over the network. So I'll be demonstrating these different administrative features, Another feature is scripted management. You can manage virtual server and its virtual machines using COM application programming. So there's a virtual server programmer's guide that's included with Microsoft Virtual Server. By the way, all these features right here were obtained from a support link right here. It's a TechNet document, and that'll be included with your video notes. You can go check out these features from the Microsoft TechNet website. So if we go back up here, we talked about scripted management. There's a number of good scripting books just for Microsoft Virtual Server available. There's WMI integration. That's the Windows Management Infrastructure. That provides counters back to the host operating system for things like performance. If you want to run Windows Performance Management or something like Microsoft Operations Manager. Microsoft Virtual Server has compatibility with Windows Server System Management products, such as automated deployment services. We'll be talking about that later. MOM and Windows Performance Manager, of course. You can have delegated administration. You can delegate administration to other administrators who are Active Directory users. You can use system event logging. This means that you can log the virtual server or the virtual machine logging events can go to the host operating system event log. So these logging events can be integrated into non-Microsoft management solutions, or they could be passed to MOM for alerting. Now let's look at scalability. With Microsoft Virtual Server, you can have SCSI hard drive supported. Virtual Server supports virtual SCSI drives up to 2 terabytes in size. The host can have multiprocessor support. So that means the virtual servers can scale across multiple processors on the host computer up to 32. Each running virtual machine can take advantage of up to 1 CPU. So this is something different that VMware Server actually will allow you to take advantage of multiple CPUs. Microsoft Virtual Server at this point can just do one. But for most of the machines, most of the server consolidation you're going to do, a single CPU is adequate. You can have multi-threading. Multi-threading means that Virtual Server 2005 is a multi-threaded application that runs as a system service with each virtual machine running on its own thread of execution. With Virtual PC, this isn't how it works because a single virtual machine can monopolize the entire computer. With Virtual Server, you don't have a problem like that because it's multi-threaded. With Virtual Server, you have large RAM support. Virtual Server supports up to 3.6 gigabytes of RAM per virtual machine. So some pretty amazing amount of virtual or RAM support out of Microsoft Virtual Server. With security, you can use SSL for administration of your virtual server system. So that way your administration that's done over the network is encrypted. You can have configurable user context for virtual machines. By default, a virtual machine runs under the account of the user who turned it on, but for added security, you can configure each virtual machine to run under a specific user account. Let's see, resource management. Virtual server has flexible memory and CPU allocation. What this means is that virtual server will dynamically allocate CPU resources from the host machine to the different virtual servers as it's needed. Other enterprise features, virtual networking. Virtual networking configuration is very important when it comes to virtual machines. Virtual Server offers its own DHCP server built into the virtualization software. You can also configure DNS and WINS and IP address lease times with that DHCP server. You can have two-node clustering with Microsoft Virtual Server. Now let's move on and talk a little bit more about what's new in Virtual Server 2005 Release 2. This is now available as a free download. Microsoft Virtual Server is a free product, and the only version of it is the Enterprise Edition. Used to there was a standard and an Enterprise. Now there's just Enterprise. It says this can be installed on servers with up to 32 physical processors. That I think that should be enough for just about anyone. As we said, it supports clustering. iSCSI support is a new feature. It supports 64-bit processors, but only for the host operating system, not for the guests. That's important. It supports PXE booting on the network adapter, improved hyperthreading. Let's see, some performance improvements. And some of the new benefits are that Windows Server guest operating systems have additional performance improvements and the 64-bit host support we talked about, availability, clustering, and iSCSI. Here's some of the benefits to Microsoft Virtual Server: rapid deployment and provisioning. The virtual hard drives. These encapsulate virtual machines in a single file so that you can easily reproduce that entire hard drive. And of course, there are some configuration files that go with it, but it's very easy to rapidly deploy new servers. Virtual networking in Microsoft Virtual Server is flexible. You can create a network that goes from guest to guest, so network isolation, a network that goes from the guest to the host, and networks that go from the guest to the internet or your local area network. There's the Virtual Server Web Console. There's Microsoft Operations Manager 2005 management support. There's Microsoft SMS 2003 Service Pack 1 support. And there's new support for automated deployment services and the Virtual Server Migration Toolkit. We'll be getting into that later in the video series. Some of the benefits of Microsoft Virtual Server is that it uses Windows qualified drivers. This says that Microsoft virtual machines utilize the Windows host operating system qualified device drivers, ensuring robust and stable device support and broad device compatibility. So the drivers that are inside each virtual machine are going to be the same no matter what the host operating system or the host hardware is. So that creates a portability of these virtual machines from one host server to another host server. So now let's move on to our next slide. And in this section, we're going to talk about the difference between Microsoft Virtual Server and VMware Server. So these are the two biggest competing products on the market today when it comes to virtualization for server environments, for server consolidation. So VMware Server is a non-Microsoft product, obviously. VMware is owned by EMC. It's a free product that was announced in 2006. It's part of a greater family of virtualization products. VMware Server is just a number of up to 10 different virtualization products and add-ons made by VMware. Whereas with Microsoft, they really have only two virtualization products and a couple add-ons, I should point out. But the VMware Server and other associated applications have been around a long time, and they're much more mature than the Microsoft products. Because of that, they have some more advanced features than the Microsoft products. They have some more wizards, and they're a little bit easier to use. VMware Server also has, at this point, with the current releases, some features like USB drive support that Microsoft Virtual Server does not offer. You can take multiple CPUs in VMware Server and allocate those out to virtual systems. And you can also have virtual machines that are running 64-bit operating systems. Those are three features I know of that at this point Microsoft Virtual Server does not support. Now for most users, those aren't big deals. Those aren't huge features that are going to prevent them from using Microsoft Virtual Server. You know, they're little things though that might sway you one direction or the other. Now, when it comes to Microsoft Virtual Server, obviously it's a Microsoft product. And for some people, that carries a lot of weight because you might have things like integration with Microsoft Mom or SMS or other Microsoft products that make Virtual Server more beneficial to you. It's a free product. Again, that was announced just like VMware Server in 2006. The availability of Microsoft add-ins are increasing. Just in this past year, Microsoft has released a few more add-ins available that help Virtual Server and allow it to do more. So things are getting better when it comes to add-ins and other packages that work with Virtual Server. Now, in my opinion, one thing that Virtual Server has over VMware Server it has some more advanced scripting features. So if you want to automate things from the command line with your virtual servers, Microsoft has provided some very nice APIs that allow you to do just that. Whereas VMware has some scripting features, but I don't think they're quite as powerful as Microsoft Virtual Server. Now, in my opinion, when using Microsoft Virtual Server, just right from the start, it seems to be slightly more confusing to use. It's not quite as user-friendly. It has that web-based interface, which is nice, but it's not quite as nice or as friendly as the application-based interface that VMware Server offers. Both of these products are free, and so what I encourage you to do is to download them both and try them both out. You know, that's the best way to learn and the best way to really understand the two different products. And I think that would be a very valuable, time well spent looking at these two different products because they are the most popular and powerful virtualization server products on the market today. So like I said in this video, we'll be concentrating on Microsoft Virtual Server. So now let's move on and we'll talk about the future of virtualization. I'm not a fortune teller, and I mean, obviously, I cannot predict the future, but some of the things that are interesting right now, as far as future virtualization technologies that are either here or they're coming out soon, the first one is hardware assisted virtualization. These are when the hardware platforms, the CPUs, such as the products from Intel and AMD, support virtualization. They help the virtualization layer software work better and perform better because the processors are aware that virtualization is installed on that server and what's being done. So with the Intel family, these are called the VT platforms, and with the AMD family, these are called the virtualization platform. And there's more of these to come. You know, maybe one day soon these will be in desktop processors for people who want to run a virtual PC or VMware Workstation. So in the future, another thing that's coming out is the next version of Windows 2003 Server, which is called Longhorn right now, is said to include something called a hypervisor, which will allow you to not have to install virtualization software like Virtual Server 2005. This virtualization layer software will just be built into the operating system, the host operating system. And because it's built into the host operating system, again, that increases performance and allows you to run more virtual machines on one host server. Something else is the VHD standard format. This is a standard format for virtual hard drives. So if the virtual hard drives between VMware Server and Virtual Server could one day be the same, and you could much more easily exchange hard drives between these different virtualization platforms. People could share them on the internet, they could download them, they could trade them, they could post them up on peer-to-peer file sharing networks, just an unlimited number of possibilities if the formats were the same between the two different virtualization platforms. Another thing that's stopping or holding back the trading and sharing of the different virtual hard drives is that Microsoft licensing prevents anyone from sharing a virtual system or a virtual machine, a virtual hard drive, if you will, that has Windows on it. So if you don't have a license for it, or the person you're giving it to, you don't give them the license to go with it, then you're breaking the law by sharing a virtual machine that has any of the Windows operating systems on it. Now, this can be done right now with Linux. You can share Linux, operating system virtual systems over the internet. You can download them. They call them appliances, but not Windows. So hopefully in the future, Microsoft will find some way to make that legal and make it easy for people to share virtual Windows systems. Something else that's already come out is Linux support. Microsoft now supports Linux as a guest operating system, and they have now offered Linux extensions. So I think Linux as a guest operating system, and who knows, maybe even one day with Microsoft as a host operating system, I doubt it. But VMware is already doing that. They're offering VMware Server for Linux that runs on Linux as the host operating system. So that's the future right now. And now let's move on. Let's talk about how Microsoft Virtual Server is supported and licensed. First, let me point out again that Microsoft Virtual Server is a free product. Now, there's only one version of Microsoft Virtual Server. There's no more standard or enterprise like there used to be. The supported host operating systems, we already talked about some of these, but let me review them in a little bit more specifics. The first one is Windows 2003 Server, and you can use both the 32-bit or the 64-bit version. You can use standard, enterprise, or data center versions as your host operating system. You can use Windows Small Business Server 2003, Windows XP Service Pack 2. Of course, that's for non-production systems. Now, for the full system requirements for Microsoft Virtual Server, you can visit this web link here that you'll find in your video notes. Now, this web link, let me caution you, it gives the system requirements, but in my opinion, they're very underpowered for what you would really want. To run, I think, 2 to 3 guest operating systems, you need between 1.5 and 2 gigabytes of RAM. And that's if you allocate between 256 and maybe on up to 384 or even 512, you could allocate to maybe one of those guest operating systems, but the other ones would have to be 256. Much more than that on a single machine, and you really start pushing your RAM requirements. And the RAM requirements are typically what hit you the most because those are inflexible. When you allocate 256 megs of RAM to a single running virtual machine, that just took 256 from your host operating system. So you can see if you had only 1 gigabyte of RAM on a computer and you ran 3 guest operating systems with 256 each, that's 786 megs. That only leaves 256 megs for the host operating system. So you can see you're really going to start losing performance there. And as we go and configure and install Microsoft Virtual Server, we'll be talking a lot more about the system requirements, the CPU allocation, the RAM allocation, the hard drive allocation, and how all that works. But I just wanted to point out that these system requirements really just give you kind of the minimums to run Microsoft Virtual Server. So those were our host operating systems. Now let's look at our guest operating systems. So these are our guest operating systems. You can run Windows 2003 Server, but no 64-bit versions. You can run Windows 2000 Server and Advanced Server, Windows NT4 with Service Pack 6A, and of course Windows XP. Now certain versions of Linux OS are now supported as guest operating systems. And really those have worked all along, but there haven't been the virtual machine add-ins available to make the performance and the usability a little bit better. And Microsoft has never supported it officially, saying that they would help you if you called in with support. So now let's talk about virtual server licensing. So when it comes to licensing of virtual machines, in general, you must have a host license for each host operating system and each guest operating system. So say you have a Windows 2003 server as the host and you're running say, 3 copies of Windows 2003 Server as the guest. That's a total of 4, so you need 4 copies of Windows 2003 Server. So you're not saving on licensing by running virtualization, but you are saving on hardware, of course, by using virtualization. Now, some of the recent changes when it comes to Microsoft Virtual Server licensing are listed here. First off, you're only required to have a guest operating system license for each running copy of the guest OS. Now, to me, this is just logical, and this is how it should have always been. And I think this is how most people did it. But now it's officially in the Microsoft licensing agreements that you only have to have a guest operating system for each running copy of the guest OS. So say you created 10 different virtual machines of Microsoft Windows 2003 Server, but you only ran one of them at a time. Well, you only need one license, is all that's really saying. Another new change is that you can move licensed guest operating systems from one server to another. Well, to me, this is just another thing that just makes common sense. If you have a licensed virtual machine, you should be able to move it to any other virtual machine that you want to, just by copying it over there and running it. That's the great thing about virtualization. Well, now you can legally do this. Another change is with Windows Enterprise Edition, you can run up to 4 virtual machines at no additional cost for these 4 guest virtual machines. Now, that's a pretty significant change. That's a big dollar savings when it comes to licensing of your guest operating systems. So if you can run 4 guest operating systems at no additional cost, you just saved 4 times whatever the cost for those guest operating systems are. So that's a great deal. However, Windows Enterprise Edition has no small price tag. It costs thousands of dollars depending on the number of processors and how it's licensed. But a lot of people end up buying Windows Enterprise Edition when they're running Microsoft Virtual Server in a large server consolidation environment because they need the extra RAM support that Windows Enterprise Edition offers. So anytime you go above 4 gigs of RAM, you need Windows Enterprise Edition to support that additional RAM. So if you had to buy it anyway because you needed more RAM, and you can also run 4 virtual machines at no additional cost, hey, that's a good benefit. Another new change is that with Windows Data Center Longhorn Server, which is coming soon, you can run unlimited instances of virtual server at no additional cost. So unlimited instances, that's a pretty nice feature as well. Now, if you're looking for more information on virtual server licensing and you have some time on your hands, you can go read these different white papers and licensing downloads about virtual server licensing. Licensing, as with any sort of legal documents, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of reading involved and a lot of technical jargon. But hopefully I provided you here some of the basic core things that you just really need to know about licensing. And if you just stick by these basic rules here, you'll be fine. And again, the biggest thing is that you have to have a host license for each of the hosts operating systems and each of the guest operating systems. If you know that and you're just running standard Microsoft Windows 2003 Server as the host and you're running virtual server, you're good to go. That's all you need to know. So now let's move on and let's talk about the virtual server emulated hardware. So you install virtual server on your host operating system. You install an operating system, say it's Windows XP, inside the guest running on your virtual server. So when you boot up that virtual machine, what BIOS does it have? What hardware does the operating system think that it's running on? Because it's not running on your real hardware that the host is running on. It's running on this virtual hardware that really doesn't exist. It's running on this virtual operating system or this virtualization layer. So to answer this question, I pasted in the official virtual server emulated hardware configuration or specifications from this Microsoft web link right here. So these came directly from the Microsoft site. I want to give them credit for that. And how Virtual Server works is it emulates your BIOS as being AMI BIOS, or American Megatrends BIOS, using the Intel 440BX chipset, and it has the following onboard components. So you can actually go into the BIOS of your virtual machine, and I'll show you how this is done. And this is the BIOS that your operating system is running on top of, is this AMI BIOS. It gives you a floppy disk drive, a single 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, and mappings to either real floppy drives on the real hardware or virtual floppy drives. And we'll be working with virtual floppy drives later in the video. It shows you, or it offers you serial COM ports. You can have up to 2 serial ports, and those can be mapped to either physical serial ports, local name pipes, or files. It gives you a single LPT printer port that maps to a physical parallel printer port on your host hardware. It emulates a standard PS2 Microsoft IntelliMouse pointing device, but it can be mapped to a PS2 device on the physical computer. It emulates a keyboard, a standard PS2 101 keyboard, but it can be mapped to a PS2 keyboard on the physical computer. As for the network adapter, it's a multi-function network adapter. It emulates the multi-port DEC 100 megabit Ethernet network adapter with 1 to 4 network connections. In some cases, this other DEC network adapter may show up on the virtual machine as an Intel network adapter. These are the same. This virtual network adapter does not support VLANs. Now, as for the processor, virtual machines use the CPU of the physical computer, which means that a virtual machine has the same type of CPU as the physical computer. But the guest operating system only sees a single CPU. As far as memory, Virtual Server supports up to 3.6 gigabytes of RAM per virtual machine. Obviously, the host operating system has to support at least enough to be able to provide that memory to the guest operating systems. Concerning a video card, Virtual Server emulates the S3 Trio 64 graphics card with 4 megabytes of VRAM, and it also supports DirectX. Concerning IDE disk storage, Virtual Server emulates up to 4 IDE devices. These are hard drives, CD-ROM, or DVD drives, or ISO images. And virtual hard drives that are up to, and this is a typo right here, I want to point this out. I copied and pasted these specifications here directly from the Microsoft TechNet web link above, and it says here 127 megabytes per IDE channel. This should be 127 gigabytes per IDE channel. 127 megabytes will barely allow you to store, a video file today. But 127 gigabytes is pretty significant. However, you might need to have a virtual server that has more disk storage than that. And in that case, you're going to have to go to a SCSI storage drive, or a SCSI virtual hard drive, to store more than 127 gigabytes per virtual hard drive. Now, concerning SCSI, Virtual Server 2005 R2 emulates the Adaptec 7870 SCSI adapter chipset. You can configure as many as 4 SCSI adapters on a virtual machine, and each SCSI adapter supports up to 7 virtual hard disks of up to 2 terabytes each. So obviously, if you need a lot of hard drives and a lot of hard disk storage, SCSI is the way to go when it comes to virtual machine storage. Now, when it comes to sound, Virtual Server 2005 does not include an emulated sound card. So there is no sound on your virtual servers. If you need sound, you need to run Virtual PC. So now let's find out what's new in the latest version of Microsoft Virtual Server. And I know that we've touched on some of these features already, but this is a summary of all the latest features from the Microsoft website that are in Microsoft Virtual Server R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 2. And that's the version that we'll be using to demonstrate the different virtual server installations and configurations in this video series. We'll be using Virtual Server R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 2. So the Beta 2 is a Service Pack 1 Beta 2. It's not a Beta 2 of Virtual Server, the application, just a beta of the Service Pack. So let's find out what's new in Service Pack 1 Beta 2. First off, we have AMD virtualization technology compatibility. So this is hardware-assisted virtualization. Intel hardware-assisted virtualization was new in 2005 R2, and we'll see that down here in a second. Then there's Volume Shadow Service support. It says Volume Shadow Service, or VSS, provides customers with improved support for backup and disaster recovery. Instead of scheduling downtime for backing up each virtual machine individually, customers will now be able to take snapshot backups of physical machines that will in turn take snapshots of all the virtual machines on that physical host. So this is a very cool way to back up your virtual machines, and we'll be exploring this later in the video series. Another feature is offline VHD mounting, or offline virtual hard drive mounting. So what this means to you is that with the host operating system, say you're not running any virtual machines, you could take one of the virtual hard drives and you could mount it on the host. You could copy files then back and forth to that virtual hard drive. Later you could mount it on your virtual server, and you could start up the virtual machine and use the virtual hard drive. So it's a pretty cool way to use virtual hard drives offline. Next one is Active Directory integration and management features. System administrators can use the Active Directory information from Microsoft Virtual Server within the Active Directory forest. So that's the end of the R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 2 features. Now these are the R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 1 features. So we have hardware assisted virtualization for the Intel chipset, and this is already being shipped on new servers, by the way. It's not something that's coming out any day. It's already here. Virtual Server Host Cluster Step-by-Step Guide. This is a white paper that's installed with Virtual Server. Larger default size for dynamically expanding virtual hard disk. We're going to take a look at dynamically expanding virtual hard drives, but all they did is they changed the default size from 16 gigabytes to 127 gigabytes. Virtual SCSI fix for Linux guests, and Microsoft Windows Vista will now be supported as a guest operating system when Virtual Server 2005 R2 Service Pack 1 becomes generally available. So already Vista can be run inside Virtual Server 2005, and there are even some Virtual Server 2005 Windows Vista add-ins. So it says here virtual machine additions for Vista Beta 2 guest OSs are available for download. That's what I'm talking about. We'll be trying those out a little bit later in the video series. So that's what's new in Virtual Server 2005, R2, Service Pack 1, Beta 2, and Beta 1. And we've reached the conclusion of our first video, Introduction to Virtualization. In this video, we learned what is virtualization. We learned how it can help us. We learned the different uses for virtualization technology: production data centers, server consolidation, testing and development, network isolation, and disaster recovery. We learned the different types of virtualization, or the different approaches. We saw how Microsoft Virtual Server uses the virtualization layer sort of as an application to run these different virtual machines inside the host operating system. We also learned that there's some other products out there, namely VMware ESX, that eliminate the host operating system and run the virtualization layer directly on the hardware. We saw that Microsoft has a virtual PC, which has some more user-friendly features, and it's designed for a just general user or a power user or maybe a salesman who wants to demonstrate a few servers or a few applications or say Windows XP workstations on his local machine. Then there's Windows uh, Virtual Server, and that's for server consolidation, and it's more designed for data centers and to be run on a server. Coming soon is Microsoft Longhorn, which will include the hypervisor. Hypervisor is what will allow virtualization to be built in directly to the operating system uh, in the next release of Microsoft Windows Server. There's the VMware products, VMware Workstation, VMware Server, and VMware ESX. There's Linux Zen, which is a open source free virtualization product. We compared Microsoft Virtual PC and Microsoft Virtual Server. Then we compared the two most popular virtualization products for the server side of server consolidation, VMware Server and Microsoft Virtual Server. We talked about the future of virtualization, what's coming soon. We learned about how Microsoft Virtual Server is supported and licensed by Microsoft. Then we learned what hardware is emulated with Microsoft Virtual Server. And finally, we learned what's new in the latest and greatest version of Microsoft Virtual Server. So with that, we've reached the conclusion of video number 1, Introduction to Virtualization. This has been a purely lecture video, and this is the only pure lecture video in the video series. All the remaining videos will be all hands-on with a little bit of lecture mixed in here and there, but primarily hands-on videos. So this video just served as an introduction to virtualization and an introduction to Microsoft Virtual Server. I look forward to the rest of this series on virtualization and Microsoft Virtual Server. Thank you very much.